Governance and Audit Committee. I don't know whether it should be a Happy New Year, but we are in February, but it is the first meeting. Before we start, can I please remind everyone that this meeting is being live streamed and the recording archived for future viewing. If a participant wishes to speak, please use the raise hand function to alert me that you would like to speak. I will indicate when it is your turn to speak, so please then select the request to speak button, which will allow you to come on screen. Please ensure that all debate be raised verbally and not via the chat function. The chat function should only be used to highlight any technical issues and or to get the attention of myself or the Democratic Services Officer. Thank you. Right, if we move to the agenda then, item 1 is apologies for absence.
None provided in advance of the meeting, Chair.
Thank you. Item 2 is to look at the minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of December 2023. This is for correctness only, and they're contained at pages 1 to 11. Someone prepared to move its correct record, please? Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Can I have a seconder? Nigel? Sorry, did you need to speak?
Yeah, I put my hand up, Chair.
Thank you. Yep. Anyone against? That's the easiest way to do it, rather than have a show of hands. Anyone against? No, thank you. That's carried. Item 3 then is to receive declarations of interest and the nature of such interest under the Council's Code of Conduct. None shown. Item 4 then is the Corporate Risk Register Quarter 2 update. Over to you, Tom.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. Thank you, Committee. You've got the Quarter 2 risk register in front of you this evening. Just by way of a really quick overview, 17 risks remaining on the register at this quarter, which are set out in the appendix. 5 of them scoring high, 5 medium high, 6 medium, and 1 risk is scored as medium low on the register. There's been limited movement in terms of risk statuses during Quarter 2, with the exception of the school reorganisation and investment risk, which has increased from a medium risk score of 6 to medium high, associated with some of the supply difficulties within that sector. In terms of the forecast directions of travel for the 17 risks, a number of them are set to diminish in the medium term. Initially legislative and local government reform risk, that, as members will be aware, was primarily associated with the introduction of the Local Government and Elections Act. With the majority of those provisions now put into place, the risk is retaining, in effect, a watching brief on that legislation. The direction of travel for Brexit is forecast to reduce again in the medium term. Committee discussed this at the last time we brought the risk register, and as requested, Cabinet gave some consideration to the continuation to include Brexit on the register. They've requested that a watching brief be retained for now on Brexit, but we do continue to actively monitor that one. And the same is the case for the COVID-19 risk. There are 3 register risks that are forecast to escalate in the medium term, Committee. The first is around financial fragility. Members will be well aware of the economic situation in the UK and the impact that's having on the public sector finance, and it's considered that's likely to increase in the medium term, especially as during this quarter work was being done on forecasting the council's budget for the coming year, and we've seen significant pressure on the council's budget. And linked with that is the workforce risk. We've discussed this at committee plenty of times before, in terms of the links with the both market fragility within certain areas of our organisation, but also in terms of attracting and retaining the workforce. And Project Zero, again, we had some discussion at committee on this one, and following consideration of this risk by the committee, we took this risk to the Project Zero board. We had a really good detailed discussion about the scoring of the risk, both at its inherent risk rating, but also the controls and the effectiveness that those controls are having on the risk. And we have identified that the current high risk rating felt appropriate to us as officers at that point, but that we've forecast that one's going to increase in the medium term, especially given the competing priorities around the available finance and resources to be able to support the delivery of net zero. All of the other risks on the register are forecast to remain static for the medium term. So that's just a really brief overview of the register, Chair.
Yes, thank you for that, Tom. And obviously, for the record, that was Tom Bowring. It wasn't Emma. So if you're looking online, it's Mr. Tom Bowring. Okay, any questions, please? Councillor Hooper.
Tom, just go into that Brexit risk still remaining. I appreciate how the conversation went, because from my perspective, it feels like this is more of a political framing rather than anything else. Brexit, all of the risks are covered elsewhere in our risk profile. So I'd really appreciate a bit more information about how that conversation went, if you don't mind. And I'd also, there's a framing issue here of some of these issues, particularly about financial fragility. Talk about it being the economic position of the UK government. This feels more of a political concern, frankly, and it's underfunding of Welsh government and therefore underfunding of council services. And I think sometimes when we play it out as being an economic concern, I think we miss the underlying factor that we can't keep doing this and we can't keep running council services in that way. Last point, if you don't mind, Chair. Project Zero, we did have a big discussion about this last time. I think we should continue to focus on this as being a concern of this committee. This only has one way to go beyond this, so I'm glad that the committee at least has taken that on board. But, you know, it concerns me, and it concerns me a lot, and I think it concerned this committee last time as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, I'm back to being Tom again now, which is good. In terms of the discussion at Cabinet regarding the Brexit risk, I think the conversation, from what I recall, was one of it being there were still some residual issues that were being worked through in terms of the Brexit arrangements, and therefore it felt appropriate for them to retain that kind of watching brief. The framing of the financial fragility risk, I wonder, Chair, if it may be useful for the next meeting of your committee that considers the risk register, whether we actually bring the full risk documentation to committee and perhaps tease out some of the issues, because you're right, Councillor Hooper. I mean, it's a really multifaceted risk, and within the supporting papers for the risk register, we do consider each of these risks from a political perspective, a reputation perspective, a service delivery and wellbeing perspective, as well as that of our resources. So perhaps if we pulled that one apart and we could do a bit of a focus on that, it might feel particularly timely, because we'll be coming towards obviously year end and closure at that point. And ditto, we could do the same around Project Zero if committee felt that it would be useful. Perhaps what I could look at, with your permission, Chair, and if this would be useful, Councillor Hooper, is when we take the 6 monthly report to the 2 scrutiny committees on Project Zero, if perhaps we included a section within that report relating to risk, and that we then use that as the basis for a slightly more detailed update to Governance and Audit Committee, if that would be useful.
Thank you, Tom. Councillor Hooper.
Just come back. Thanks for that, Tom. I think they would be useful, the 2 reports coming to. But when I was asking for about Brexit, I was actually asking for a bit more information, not what you said again. So I think I'd be interested, what are the actual concerns that Cabinet are talking about in relation to Brexit that aren't taken elsewhere? Because frankly, if we're just putting it on there without it being something of value, then it is valueless. And that's part of what we're doing. So I just, you know, can you tell us the what are the key concerns that are Brexit related? Thank you.
And with your permission, Chair, I think it might be useful if the committee made that recommendation to Cabinet as part of your consideration this evening, and we can then get that that information included in your next report. What I should have covered in the overview as well is that we took an item a couple of weeks ago to the strategic leadership team to look at the risk register and the whole landscape for the organisation, and to have a discussion around how do we look at the framing and presentation of all of these risks, with a view that we'll do a full review and overview of the risk register now at the end of the year, so that when we go into the new 24-25 year, we've got a refreshed set of a register to present to your committee.
Anyone other question? Councillor Goodjohn? Oh, Councillor Goodjohn and then Councillor Prothero. Just bear with me, Councillor Prothero.
Thank you, Tom. Can I ask around additional learning needs risk? As you know, since we last spoke with the Q1 update, there's been additional funding of £850,000 regarding additional learning needs, but there's been no improvement to the likelihood of the risk or the effectiveness of the controls on the metrics that we have here. So can you tell us a little bit more about what that's gone to, and has that improved the risk at all, even if it is only marginally? And if you don't have the information now, can you send it to us later?
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. I don't have the details to hand, and I wonder if there's also an element of the timing of the additional funding announcement and this the period that this register update covers, but I can certainly ask my colleagues in education for some further information.
Councillor Prothero.
Thank you, Chair. My question is related to the risks around the integrated health and social care. And I'm just a bit curious as to why that's quite a low risk and a static risk, considering what we know about the increase in volume and the complexity of cases with this particular sector, the escalating costs, and all this against the background of us, and in Wales, the Welsh Government actually spending 14% more per person on health and social care. And that's because of choices that Welsh Government have made, despite everything else that's happening with Westminster. So yeah, the question is really around why we feel that that is a reasonable risk to put on integrated health and social care. Thank you.
Tom, I understand that the Director of Social Services is on the call, and I didn't know whether, if he wanted to speak, I will allow him to. Otherwise, I should imagine what you're going to say is, I'll refer that back to Social Services. Lance, over to you.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting to come in there. There are a number of risks on that list that relate to social services, and this one is particularly the one that's described as integrated health and social care, particularly around the risks of providing services in an integrated way. There are other ones on there in relation to market fragility, and another one also on there in relation to demand management and capacity, which are rated much higher. So I would hope that gives some reassurance. It's just that they're different risks, and they've been separated that way.
Councillor Prothero. Councillor Prothero, is it a legacy?
Request to speak. I suppose request to speak, but
Which one's?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Lance. That's fine. I just wanted to ask for clarity over why we didn't feel it was an escalating risk, but I understand and accept what you've just said, so that's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Prothero. There is no one else indicating to speak. Any comments? I have a couple of comments, certainly in regards to the 3 with risk forecasts to diminish, the legislative changes, Brexit and COVID-19. Whilst I understand, obviously, Councillor Hooper's asked for some further information as to why they remain on the risk register. my view, similar to what we've said previously in committee, is that they should be removed. The issue is Brexit is an ongoing issue. It was, I think the 4-year anniversary was last week. It's a matter of fact now. It's a day-by-day issue that we need to address and move forward on. So I think unless there is a very specific reason why it's there, I think it should be dealt with on a day-by-day basis. And then being apolitical and understanding why this register, as I think it says, is thematic of political, legislative and whatever. No, I won't say what I'm going to say because otherwise I will get myself into trouble. So Brexit, I think, it should be removed. I think COVID-19, I think that's another risk really in reality that should be removed because otherwise, given the recent health scares regarding measles in this country and the, the incredible effect that is having on our young people, I'd rather replace COVID with measles or one of the other diseases which are coming out prevalent now. And the legislative changes, obviously, I know we got Debbie on the line, but, the pieces of legislation are in being now and have been implemented. Obviously, everyone's working to them now. And I think, in my view, they should be removed. So I would like, if possible, to ask Cabinet to get rid of them all on that basis. The issue about financial fragility, again, I'm just a bit concerned that the score is 12. I know you're indicating that it's forecast to escalate. I think, again, just a comment whether it should actually now be 16 on the basis that you've got a deficit still of 11.1 million to find. And the indication, my understanding is, and presumably Matt can assist, whilst there was a settlement of whatever it was for the Vale this year, 3 point whatever, I think it was, is that the indication is for the next 2 years thereafter, it's going to be zero. It's going to be flat. So, you're going to have some major issues trying to address that going forward. That's what I'm told by other councils I sit on, is that the indication from the finance, Director of Finance, is the indication is from Welsh Government, it's going to be flat line, it's going to be zero. Obviously, we don't know until it's awarded. So there is a real risk there moving forward, given you've got 11.1 deficit still to find this year. So those were my only comments in regards to dealing with it. And the other one is just the public building compliance. It's got a risk score of 4. Now, again, there's very limited information as to what the backlog of repairs are to council property. Now, I don't just mean council buildings and such like. We're looking at highway infrastructure, presumably as well, or public realm works, which is within the public building compliance. So to have such a low score, either all your buildings are in tip-top condition and not requiring any repairs or just basic maintenance, or is there an issue there as well? That's my only comment, Tom. I don't know whether you could answer that because obviously it come under another directorate, I should imagine. But there are serious concerns here about what some of these risk scores may be not being open and honest and transparent about.
Yeah, if I can come back in terms of the building compliance comment, Chair, and then perhaps Matt can come in terms of the latest forecasts in terms of the council's finance. The buildings, public buildings compliance risk relates back to a recommendation that was made as part of Audit Wales's corporate assessment of the council a number of years ago, where a number of recommendations were made in terms of how the data was held and recorded and monitored relating to compliance activities within council buildings. So it's specifically the risk of not achieving what we were set out to do, which is why it's considered to be at that level now and is almost a watching brief on that one. So it's not reflective of wider issues around infrastructure and assets.
That then, because obviously building stock would, I should imagine, be quite a risk.
there are lots of risks associated with infrastructure assets, council housing, all of those kind of things. They're reflected within individual service registers and would come here if they were considered significant enough to elevate to a corporate risk.
But it does again raise the issue for me is the matters should be looked at corporately and collectively. So if there are issues within directorates, which presumably may be low key, collectively and on an aggregate basis, they actually may be a big issue for the council looking at building compliance. I only raise that, maybe just someone could have a little look at that. Deal with the other question.
Yeah, it's partly a question of timing, isn't it? And the most recent assessment of this one was made before Christmas and around the time that the medium-term financial plan refresh went to Cabinet. And I was just reading through the document that Tom referenced earlier that sits behind this one. So it was providing an update on the economic position at that time. It was attempting to stay relatively apolitical, not speculating on what government might do with any potential headroom, but certainly within the assessment actually did raise the likelihood that we would do no better than the 3.1% that had been the year 2 of the previous year's settlement. And obviously, as we've seen very just before Christmas, that's exactly what we had. But obviously this risk will need to be we'll keep it under continuous review.
Before Councillor John comes in, but is there an indicative settlement of 0% next year? Not this year. Obviously we got this year, but for next year and the year after. So that'll be whatever it is, 25, 26, won't it? 26, 27.
Yes, there's been various language used around it. Our assumption is it's going to be 0%.
Thank you for that. Councillor John, sorry.
Apologies, Chair. I just wanted to raise the point that there's been significant investment in the council's buildings and infrastructure, generally between schools and the 21st Century Schools programme, along with the Civic itself and the dock offices. So just to say that while I agree with you in general, I do think that it's fair if the report comes back and we say, I don't think it's a major concern just because of the level of investment that we have put in, including the housing building plan, the housing business plan, which has significant retrofit built within the plan. So I don't think that is the most major of concerns. I just wanted to raise around financial fragility as well with the government grant in future, because what we've got coming to corporate performance indicates a 1% rise after 24-25. That's the figures that we've been given by the finance team. And the deficit is down to 7.9 million. So it's, if anything, we're seeing things getting maybe a little bit better with the figures that we've got at the moment. Of course, you're right to question whether that could be 16, but actually, if you put us in comparison to many other councils across Wales, things are not quite as bad here with the figures that we have at the moment, of course.
Thank you, Councillor John. Very helpful. As always, the devil is in the detail on lots of these issues, isn't it? And obviously, I'm aware of the position of several other councils in Wales, but we're dealing with the Vale here, so that's our concern, isn't it? To make sure it's got robust financial management in place, which it has, in my view. But a 0% rise for council tax or 0% grant for the next 2 years is very difficult, very, very difficult. Okay. If there are no other questions or comments, we go to the recommendations. And the recommendations are that we note Q2 position of the corporate risks, April 23 to September 23, outlined in the risk summary report Annex A. and the comments made to Tom and obviously noted by Gareth be referred to Cabinet for their consideration and endorsement, hopefully at the meeting when Cabinet will consider a report on the corporate risk register for Q2. Obviously, if they wish to report back and say why they're not removing it, then we look forward to receiving that. I don't know whether I can call the Leader of the Council in, presumably. Maybe that's something I'll look at in due course. Someone prepared to move, please. Thank you. Thank you. Anyone against? No. Thank you very much. Item 5 then is the annual whistleblowing report. Over to Debbie, I assume. Hi, Debbie.
Hello. Thank you, Chair. So as you mentioned, it's the annual update and also providing you with a summary of the results of the survey, which has recently been undertaken of staff. I've provided a slightly longer executive summary to this report because I'm just conscious that there is a lot of data within the report, a lot of figures and also the appendices. So hopefully it makes it a slightly easier read. So provided in the executive summary some of the backdrop data about the policy when that was reviewed by committee. And obviously at the last meeting, I brought a copy of the policy, given the fact we had a number of new members on this committee. Some facts to highlight. 2022-23, we had 11 incidents reported, so whistleblowing notifications. And as you're aware, from the previous report, it was certainly a significant increase to the average that we'd seen over the 8 years previously. In the executive summary, I will jump also to the final page, just to give that comparison to where we currently are. So since the 1st of April, we've had 15 whistleblowing notifications come into the council. The figures have changed slightly because, of course, it's a moving feast, isn't it? So in the paper before you tonight, it refers to 10 currently under investigation. That's now 7. So three investigations are concluded. The figures still remain the same, that 2 were outside the policy. But we've seen that there were 5 incidents which were not upheld, with 1 partially upheld and being considered under a separate policy. So that's the news on that as at today's date. As in previous reports, just to get a feel for the numbers for the Vale in comparison to other local authorities in Wales, I've reached out to other monitoring officers, and on the first page, the executive summary, it's setting out the numbers that other local authorities are experiencing, other notifications. That there is one that particularly stands out with 17 notifications, but what I'm hearing is that they're not all under the policy, similar to the Vale situation, not all under the policy and not all upheld. So I think that's quite a useful comparison. I know it's something that members previously had asked me to undertake. The executive summary then moves on just to give a high-level overview of the number of complaints which are received through other council policies, the corporate complaints policies. So I've provided you with the figures there, and also complaints from which have come via the Ombudsman's office. I think certainly it's fair to say that what we have experienced since we've introduced the Speak Out Hub, that the majority of notifications are coming through that source. So that is quite positive. So be that via emails or telephone. So that's that is encouraging. We have undertaken this year again a significant amount of promotional work. A policy on a page for managers was produced, very much sort of in line with the discussions that we had last year at committee. So that was produced for service heads and team leaders to share within their DMTs and team meetings. We had the support from senior leadership team, the chief executive, also in this space, and that was a recommendation specifically from this committee. Also, prior to the launch campaign, we drafted an animation, a video animation, and also a further policy on a page in line with that animation, which was well received. Considerable amount of work undertaken by colleagues in this space, with prior to the campaign launching, posters, hub posters, taking up the point from Councillor Hooper last year about sometimes campaign literature can be two-dimensional. So we had hub posters, a lot of data going up online, reaching out to colleagues who were working remotely. We also created, as I've mentioned, the short animation and put data up onto the council's staff net. We also sent launch email bulletins to staff, to elected members, partners, town and community councils, contractors, suppliers. The reach was wide, and also to schools and school governors. And that was an area that we also followed up, repeated before we undertook the survey. Also pleased to report again, the chief executive incorporated into his end of week messaging the importance of the policy, and also the importance of staff completing the survey. So a significant push there, which I was grateful for. With regards to the survey itself, there is a slight typo on the second page of the executive summary. Sadly, there was a reduction in the number of respondents for the 2023 survey in comparison to 21-22. The figure, rather than reading 232, should read 323 for the previous survey. So there was a drop there, albeit we did get responses from all 21 service areas. The executive summary then moves on to provide some high-level data. So promotional work undertaken to raise awareness of the policy is having a positive impact. We see a percentage of colleagues increasing from 75 to 92%, stating they have that increased awareness of the policy. 49% of colleagues, though, have read the policy that responded to the survey. 54% stated that they'd read the whistleblowing policy on a page or watched the summary video. Percentage of respondents able to identify all 10 areas of malpractice covered by the policy did dip from 68% to 53.29%, albeit a further 10.73% were able to identify 9 of the areas. So just then covering off the respondents, the percentage respondents reporting that they were aware of the protections increased in the 2023 survey from 48% to 74%. So that's encouraging, but we're still seeing, possibly not unexpectedly, that some respondents to the survey are flagging up reasons they wouldn't be willing to whistleblow is because of fear of potential consequences for themselves. So that's an area again that we need to bear in mind and be mindful of. Certainly going forward, areas for attention are certainly looking at changing branding. Some of the feedback we had from staff was that they'd completed the survey, albeit it was the survey the year before. So we're going to look at rebranding, further promotional activities. We are, in addition to the animation that we undertook, we are working to finalise an IDEV training package, so that is something which is in train. So that's the high level information that I wanted to share with you. There is reference in the body of the report at paragraph 2.25 to some work undertaken by independent members of the Standards Committee. And as a result of the work that they undertook, they did touch upon whistleblowing and the importance of ensuring that staff were fully aware of the policy. And one of the recommendations coming from Standards Committee, which took place on Friday, was that they are referring to this committee their recommendation that that should be made to ensure 100% of the workforce know of the whistleblowing policy, and possibly including reference to the policy in the induction and refresher packs is their comments to this committee. So I think I'll hand back to yourself, Chair, and happy to take any questions.
Yes, thank you for that, Debbie. We've got the questions now. Councillor Hooper.
Thanks, Debbie. And I think this is it's a bit like the Scotland-Wales match, this game of two halves, isn't it? So I think there's a really good news story insofar as we've got people who know more about the whistleblowing policy. I think that should be applauded. I think there is an issue of depth, which I'd be really interested in Debbie's views about how do we change that. So it seems as though people are arguably skim reading the policy and yet not knowing the depth of it, which I think is really, really important. But the downside is, if you look at the graph that was provided as part of our pack, this is, showing almost exponential growth in the number of people who are whistleblowing. Now, that can either be a good thing insofar as people feel confident to utilise the policy, or we've got some other issues that we need to understand. And I'd be interested, and I've no idea whether this is true, but is there any correlation between overall colleague satisfaction? Is there something else in amongst this that we seem to have, that we could look into? And particularly referencing what happened during the COVID years, there was no complaints using safeguarding at all. So I just wonder, are we bottled something up that people are talking to? The last thing, I suppose, is this reference, that last point, 100% no whistleblowing policy. Surely that's where we are at the moment. I'm not sure that adds anything particularly to the conversation. I'm sure that's your ultimate target. And if it is now a new target that we've got to hit 100%, then I'd be really interested in what magic bullet you've got for that. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hooper. Debbie?
Thank you. I think going in reverse order, absolutely, with regards to that target. I mean, we're just reaching as high as possible, and I think certainly from the promotional work that we undertake, and the different approaches which are adopted, certainly support the fact that we are pushing very hard on this. I'm always really keen to hear other suggestions, other approaches we can adopt, and I mean certainly the whistleblowing policy, if it's not included with packs for new recruits, well, certainly I'd be encouraging that. The IDEV training, that is an area that I feel might assist, and also with the mandatory training. But I am very conscious that that there are demands on officers and officers' time, a lot of training. So certainly I think we have to be careful that we don't overstretch staff. It is, I suppose, my concern. I think also, I think one of the interesting points, which came back to me, and Tracy Dickinson fed this back to me. I know she's in the chamber tonight. Is she liaised with trade union colleagues. And there was a concern that staff, if they are being over-surveyed, they can get a little bit survey weary. So, that's something for us to bear in mind. But as I say, it's something that as officers we're very keen just to explore other avenues, and even if we're not getting a full response or an increased response to the surveys, at least if we're satisfied that we're getting the message out to staff, I think that's the main sort of area for us to focus on. I think looking at the actual notifications which are coming in, that there are some themes which are coming through, and certainly those are areas which are being, some of them are still the subject of investigation, but there are some themes coming through, and that is an area that I work very closely with other colleagues when we have our quarterly meetings. So that's ongoing also at a high level, so that we make sure that we capture that, and albeit matters might not fully come within the whistleblowing policy, that we're aware of those trends and that we do everything appropriate to tackle those concerns. Hopefully I've addressed
Yeah, thank you for that, Debbie. I have a nod from Councillor Hooper. Nigel.
Thank you, Chair. Those are some really good information. I agree with a bit about the surveying people, and if you over-survey people, it can certainly get different responses than you're intending. I've got 3 points or 3 questions, if I can, please. I think there's some fantastic work there about awareness of the policy and raising that and getting that out there. I think that's great. The more people know about it, then the more chance there is of, if there is something happening that shouldn't be in the organisation, it will be escalated, which is what we want. But more than awareness of the policy, my concern really is about the use of the policy. And there was a lot of bits coming through in that survey in question 8 about words like fear of what would happen to them. And of course, you get some of that within the any whistleblowing survey. However, there was quite a high level of that. So question 1 for me, I think more than just bearing it in mind and being mindful of it, I'd like to know what are management doing around the cultural element of this, and that there is obviously, whether it's in parts of the organisation or across the organisation, there is clearly some cultural elements that need to be addressed here. So I'd like to know what management are doing around that. Secondly, in the outcome by directorate graph, there were obviously quite a few that were not upheld. And I'm just wondering, with regard to that, who does those investigations? Is there an element of independence around that to make sure that that process is fully transparent and open and is in the best interest of the organisation? And then thirdly, I got a bit confused here because that outcome by directorate one had 46 items on it, whereas the report references 34 cases in the last 8 years. So I'm not sure about the number I would like, and I appreciate you won't have this to hand, but I'm wondering if it's possible to find out, say, for anyone who's whistleblowed in the last 3 years, how many of those people are still working for the local authority? Because in terms of that understanding, that fear aspect, knowing whether, if you can whistleblow, that those people are still within the business and aren't, say, for example, on long-term sick or anything like that, so they are still working for the authority, with evidence that the whistleblowing policy and the protections that that policy provides are being effective. I appreciate you won't have that to hand, but hopefully that's something we could perhaps get sent through to the committee. Those are my 3 points. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. Debbie?
Thank you. Just picking up the point about the investigations and that element of independence. the majority of investigations are actually undertaken by colleagues in internal audit. And with feedback to myself, so I'm satisfied that there is that independence. So I don't think that's an area of concern. On the issue, the last point with regards to staff raising the whistleblowing notifications in the last 3 years, I think that is an interesting piece of work, and I think looking to colleagues in human resources, that we can certainly prepare that's for you, and we can circulate that outside of this meeting. And on the cultural element, I think similarly, I think to a certain extent it goes hand in hand, doesn't it? Or certainly, I would suggest that I mean, certainly since I've been undertaking this work as monitoring officer, there's been a significant push to broaden the opportunities for staff to whistleblow. The reach has really extended far and wide, and so I think from a cultural perspective, I think we are and certainly in comparison, speaking with other monitoring officers, we are in a very good place in the Vale. But I think that cultural piece as well, I think that would be useful for me, just to drill down a little bit deeper with colleagues in HR and also pick that up in the response that'll follow after this meeting.
Thank you, Debbie. Is that okay, Nigel? Are you satisfied with those answers?
Yeah, thank you. The only thing I would add is, rather than just with HR, I think it's the tone at the top. So I think it's a leadership team element as well around how you're encouraging that culture and removing that fear across the organisation, and the other stats that I asked for, and more than happy for those to be provided outside the meeting. That will inform that as to whether you do have an issue or not as well, or what's going on there. So I think more than just HR, it's a tone at the top sort of governance element as well. But yeah, happy with all those responses. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. Councillor Norman.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Debbie. Just a quick question. It's all very well encouraging whistleblowing. Is the person who actually makes the complaint always informs of the outcome? And if they don't, of the outcome of that complaint, and if they're not happy with the result of that, have they got a right of appeal against that and to press for further investigations, etc.?
Thank you, Councillor Norman. Debbie?
Yes, thank you. Can I just also add, as a follow-on to the previous point, I think it's worth flagging that following on from the recommendation from the committee, following on from my last report, that senior leadership team, the chief executive, certainly supported sharing this as a topic on and putting on the agenda of team meetings, and making sure that the information was disseminated through the organisation. So I just wanted to just put that on record, that has been followed through, and I think that's really a positive point for the organisation. But I do take the point, it is much wider than human resources. Moving on to Councillor Norman's question, certainly yes, all complainants, whether it's under any policy of the council, would be informed of the outcome of a complaint, or whether the complaint was moving forward and being investigated. If it then was the case that the investigation was resulting in a disciplinary matter and a disciplinary hearing, obviously there are confidentiality implications there. So the detail of the outcome of the case, so to speak, would not be shared, because obviously the council does have obligations, DPA obligations, but as soon as a notification is received, the system, which the system that we use automatically generates a notification within a particular timescale. I'm conscious my colleague Tony Curlis is on the call, and I'm sure he would also like to comment in that space. But so that there is that contact with the person making the notification. Under the procedure, there isn't the whistleblowing procedure. There isn't a right of appeal, but certainly under other councils' policies, which will then be engaged, there are right of appeals there.
Thank you, Debbie.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Chair. An interesting report. I've just got a few questions and maybe a couple of comments on it. I'm very glad to hear that new joiners will certainly get more information about this. Obviously, that's for somebody coming into an organisation, any organisation, it's important that that happens. So if we assume we got 288 answers, I'm just looking at the answers to question 9 in that. And then in comparison with some of the answers about why people may not may not comment or fear for their future career or what have you, is that the highest answer is line manager. And I was just wanted to check within the training or the booklets that are given out, are we actively encouraging people to use the speak out line and not go to line managers? Of course, you may trust your line manager implicitly, but it just strikes me that having worked in places with whistleblowing is that often if the line of communication is taken away from line managers into a completely separate channel of communication, then people tend to speak up more. And if that is clear in the training or not, and we have 288 answers, and we say we're trying to reach more, what would be, and of course we want to be careful about over surveying, as pointed out, people get bored of it. But it's a very small snapshot. I think we need to try to find a way to get far more visibility into this, because it may well be, as the numbers are rising, that as more people are encouraged to speak, the numbers continue to rise. We need to know whether this is cause and effect, or if there's genuinely a proper increase in numbers, or people are more aware about how to speak up, so they speak up more. Hello? What's happening there?
Councillor Wood, you're buffeted, I think, on the, I don't know whether
very strange.
Yeah, I don't know whether the internet's...
What is going on here? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me clearly now?
We can, but it's sort of it's as
Screen is frozen. Perhaps
yeah, your screen is frozen. Perhaps if you take your camera off, we may be able to hear you.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me clearly? Did you hear my statement then previously?
Yeah, it's not as clear as it should be.
Right. It was fine earlier. Oh, well. Did you get any of my questions?
I think we got a question, which Debbie can respond to, hopefully.
Yes, that's very strange.
Debbie, you're mute.
I suppose I got the point about the line managers, and I suppose the issue is we do, and I've looked at the data, and the majority of whistleblower notifications that have come in since the 1st of April 2023, the majority are via the Speak Out line. I suppose what we're looking at with the results of the survey are the survey completed by 288 members of staff, so it's not necessarily going to be the same individuals. So I suppose it's sort of not not being able to compare the two in that regard. I think what is important to flag up is that through the campaigns we promote every avenue, so that there is that reach, that those options are provided, so that there is that awareness that there are a whole range of ways in which a whistleblower may raise their concerns. So hopefully that addresses at least one of your questions, Councillor Wood.
Yeah, I don't know how much you got of the rest of it. No, that's fine. I mean, I'm just curious. I work for organisations where they actively try to discourage going through line managers and take it out into the open. But anyway, that's for policy to be discussed.
Thank you, Councillor Wood. You are frozen again, so slight technical error there. Councillor Prothero.
Thank you, Chair. Debbie, so yes, really interesting report, and the survey comments when asked if they would whistleblow, some of them are very revealing. I guess my concern really is to do with that sort of feeling of negativity, as Nigel's already raised, the fear of doing so and the repercussions if they do. And I'm wondering if you look at the overall incidents, be them 34 or 46 over an 8-year period, and only on 2 occasions them being upheld completely, I'm just wondering, do we support, because obviously there's a full investigation, everybody's going to be, who needs to be involved will be involved, whether it's interviews. So do we support people after the event, so to speak? And I think, as Nigel has said, it would be really interesting to review all of those people who have been part of an exercise to investigate, and are they still with us? Because with this, and it's quite a dangerous thing, isn't it? You want to encourage whistleblowing, but we need to know, what are we doing in so doing that? And what, if there are genuinely situations where most people end up not working here after this has happened, and especially if the whistleblowing hasn't been upheld, it's damaging, isn't it? So, yeah, so that's my question. Thank you.
Debbie?
Chair. Yeah, absolutely. Really good point. What I would say, and I think, in the follow-up data I can provide this, a lot of the notifications do come in anonymously. I would flag that up. So, that's something that I can certainly share. But yeah, very, very interesting. I think, a piece of work to be undertaken. I would have to undertake that very carefully and very sensitively. But I think, it's a very good point, and I think an area for us to certainly to do some follow-up work in.
Thank you, Debbie. Any other questions? I've just got a couple of questions, Debbie, for you. The second bullet point is in regards to corporate complaints. I've raised this before, and it's not new. We've got 495 corporate complaints this year. And my question always is what about councillor complaints, where members of the public actually formally complain to a councillor? And that's then fed in through the directorate or whatever, and doesn't go through the process where they get registered as a corporate complaint. And my concern always is there under-reporting, because I think I worked out at one stage that if each councillor had 4 complaints a day for 200 days, there'll be another 20,000 complaints coming into the authority. So it's just the issue about under-reporting, and I know Tom's looked at it in the past, and I am aware that other authorities don't record it either, but it does raise an issue for me about the transparency in regards to the process. So I didn't know whether you would be able to provide any comment on that question. The second point I had is obviously 288 staff responded to the survey. Is it possible to know how many staff the survey went out to? Because obviously 288 out of, 2,000 staff, 1,000 staff, whatever, would be useful, because again, all the percentages are then based upon 288, and it would be interesting to know what sort of percentage that response was for. And again, if we go to question 12 and the graph that you've kindly produced there, we got the numbers of responses, which they say which service area they've worked in, and it goes across the 21 service areas. In one area, obviously housing service, we got 48, but again, it would be interesting to know how many individuals work in that team, so that the directors can actually analyse this to say, actually, some of the teams are not responding, or very low response from some of the teams of people. And the one that sort of caught my eye was there was a response from one person in one service area, and that was under standards and provision. Now, what standards are they dealing with? Because clearly whistleblowing is a standard to address. So, if one individual's only responded to it, that gave some interest in reading. And the final question is in regards to the panel review carried out by the Standards Committee. Is it possible for this committee to see the outcome of their review, given that we deal with governance of the authority as well? It may be an exempt report, but I think it would be interesting. I know one question's been referred, one outcome's been referred to us, but it may actually be interesting to see what other outcomes or recommendations they've made, which actually may affect us, and for us to look at as a committee. That's the last question.
Thank you. So with regards to councillors' complaints, I'm not the complaint specialist, but I know there are other people in the meeting, other officers who are better placed than me. But I think there is that differentiation between whether it's a service query or whether it is a true complaint, and I know there's a science to that, and certainly. Certainly, I'm sure Attorney Curlis would be able to assist in that regard if you required some further detail with regards to matters being raised with councillors. The number that have responded, certainly the survey did go out to the total number of staff, plus to schools that adopted the policy. I don't have the exact number before me, but certainly that can be shared. And with regards to the team that you particularly referred to, standards and provision, I don't have the details as to how many staff are actually within that team. But I think for going forward, certainly for next year, I think it would assist if it is broken down in this way. And I think it is useful to have the data as set out in regard to question 12, the figures of the total members of staff in those respective teams should also be provided, so that there is that opportunity to compare how well the teams have responded to the survey. With regards to the panel review, it was a Part 2 report, because there was some personal information contained within the report, and it was a report which was prepared as part of a working group. The report was approved at the Friday's Standards Committee meeting, with a reference to Cabinet. So the report will be shared with Cabinet, but I don't see there being a concern with the report also coming to Governance and Audit Committee. Having said that, I've highlighted the recommendation which is contained within that report.
Yes, thank you for that, Debbie. Clearly those responses, the numbers on question 12 would be very useful. I think, even if we did look at the Standards Committee report formally, then we can go into a Part 2 session. There's no issues there. I'll leave the question with Tony. Knows my views on the corporate complaints or corporate councillor queries or councillor. The whole definition again is what's the definition of a complaint? And I think that's what the crux of the issue is there. Any other questions? Any comments? Matthew.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to raise this as a question, but maybe it's more of an opinion or a comment in that regard. I think the question of mandatory training versus non-mandatory training, certainly from my experience, places I've worked, I believe in different sectors, mandatory training seems to be the most favoured. I think a lot of sectors see whistleblowing as being akin to other things such as cybersecurity or data protection as being something that all staff need to know. Now, the advantages, there is advantages and disadvantages of that, but the advantage it gives you is that it gives you more data at the front end. So instead of talking about 288 respondents for surveys, you could, and it doesn't need to be a long training, but you could say, we're going to do this 5-minute video and incorporate what we've got for now. Ask some questions, and that gives you very detailed information across all those sectors of who've completed it, who've understood it because they've answered the questions right, and then gives you a bit more detail on what to work with. And then you can probably drill down a little bit into those surveys we're talking about understanding comments per department. But I think that's just worth bearing in mind that because something's a mandatory training, doesn't need to be really laborious, doesn't need to be 4 hours long, can be 10 minutes long, can be an understanding. And I guess my view on whistleblowing is, yes, you want people to know the policy, but also you want them to know where to find the policy as much as understanding all the detail of it. So I guess that's some insight, whether it's useful or not. It's just my experience on the topic.
Yes, thank you for that, Matthew. I'm sure Debbie will take some of that back. Any other comments? Councillor Hooper?
Just picking up on Matthew's point, I wonder if there's a kernel of a recommendation there. If we've got to try and hit 100% of people in this, just make it mandatory training. I wonder whether this committee would support that. I think it's a good idea and I would support it.
We can make it a recommendation if someone's prepared to second it, or you move it and Councillor Hooper seconds it.
I'd probably stop short of making it my personal recommendation.
It would be a recommendation from this committee that the whistleblowing process and procedure be made mandatory.
I'll move then, Chair.
Do you have a second?
Also, I'll definitely be in support of it.
Right, okay. We'll add that in due course, the recommendation, as long as it's supported. Anyone else? Any comments? No, okay, we go to the recommendations then. The recommendations contained within the report is that Governance and Audit Committee note the contents of the report. 2, that we continue to receive the annual reports in relation to the policy implementation and incidents. 3, that we continue to receive the annual reports in relation to staff survey results. And number 4, that committee recommends that whistleblowing training be made mandatory within the council.
Can I ask that we adopt the recommendation from standards first and that we make the mandatory training subject to resources available within the council and leave?
Recommendation from standards. Debbie, can you just confirm what the recommendation is specifically from standards to this committee?
Absolutely. If I could find that piece of paper, bear with me. Isn't it always the way? Sorry. Yeah, I've got it now. So it is, efforts should be made to ensure that 100% of the workforce know of the whistleblowing policy, possibly by including it in the induction and refresher packs.
Do you have a second for your proposal?
I think just to expand upon that, I think they're not going to really achieve their 100% by putting in induction and refresher packs, because those packs do not regularly go out to staff who are currently with the organisation. So I think a two-strand approach is probably going to be the most effective. So I think, I suggest you might want to reflect on that going forward, that the whistleblowing policy is included in all induction and refresher packs, and then together with mandatory training on the whistleblowing policy. And I think that way you will achieve what Mr. Evans mentioned, and also Councillor Goodjohn, and also would address the thrust of the point being made by the Standards Committee. Hopefully that assists.
Yeah, thank you for that. Much more eloquently than I put it, but I think I'm sure the members will be fairly content that it needs to be part of the induction pack, and that for all new learners and that new joiners of the authority. But I do think that we just need to firm it up as a Governance and Audit Committee and make that whistleblowing training mandatory. Do you need to say something?
Yeah, so my microphone, it is working. I can hear myself, so that's really great as well. Yeah, just to kind of come in on that a little bit, because I would support that we need to ensure that whistleblowing is aware, that all our employees are aware of whistleblowing from the point in which they start with us. I just wanted to really highlight that we are looking at this at the moment in terms of the balance of mandated training that we need to do as an organisation against the appropriateness of the volume against recruitment and demand to recruitment. And I'll just caveat that by explaining that at the moment we've had quite a request for mandated training in a number of different spheres across the organisation. And actually, if we make it too onerous for individuals at the point in which they are joining us with significant amounts of mandated training modules, then it can be a barrier. It can also be a barrier in terms of how we look to offer that in terms of training modules to individuals who may not be as proficient with using some of IT systems or may not have access to IT systems. So we're also looking at the best way in which we could ensure that we've got awareness across the organisation for some who are not as IT literate as others. Equally in that space, just again to make you aware that a number of our schools don't adopt this whistleblowing process. They also adopt the Welsh Government schools whistleblowing policy. So we'd need to take into account that we have a number of different whistleblowing modules available. I don't wish you to think that I am suggesting that we don't have mandated training. I'm just asking perhaps that we just look and consider in a bit of a balanced way the amount of required learning, I would say, as an organisation against the needs of that organisation moving forward from a recruitment perspective.
Thanks, Tracy. Councillor Hooper.
Just picking up on that, I worry that we're walking into a bit of a storm. So I think some of the feedback that we've all referenced today about people being scared to talk about it, I think that if people understood the policy, I think that would give them some comfort. So I think this is, I'm more of the case, and I think picking up on Matthew's point about this being, it doesn't have to be elongated or onerous. I think this is something that this committee in particular, given its name,
I'm just thinking aloud here now, because would it be worth us making this recommendation for consideration by the relevant scrutiny committee? Because obviously the scrutiny committee is there to improve things in the council and put forward suggestions to the cabinet. You know, ideas of strengthening issues which are going forward. So if we made the recommendation that, picking up what Debbie said in regards to ensuring it's part of the induction pack for new joiners, and then for others on a regular basis, that mandatory training, picking up those who are already in place in the authority, and if you're doing it on an annual basis, you'll pick up the new ones again on an annual basis. And ask scrutiny to look at that with provide a recommendation going forward to cabinet or council for adoption. I'm not used to giving cabinet scrutiny committees pieces of work, but clearly that's what they're there for. Councillor Good, John.
Yeah, we're all good. Okay. Yeah, I think that the recommendation from standards regarding the induction packs, I think that can be done relatively quickly. So if that goes directly to the officers and that scrutiny committee consider, I think, corporate performance, if I'm not mistaken, regarding HR, and particularly regarding the resources around the practicalities of making that happen. I think if we let corporate performance consider that, I think that would be fair on all.
Could that be achieved, Tom?
Certainly, and I'm wondering if committee would be comfortable whether perhaps as part of the next update on the people strategy that Tracy and colleagues will be reporting to committee and then on to cabinet, whether we could include that recommendation alongside a review of all mandated learning so that it's seen in the round, and we could certainly make some recommendations on that basis. Can certainly do that.
So in reality, we're endorsing the recommendation of the Standards Committee, but would also recommend that the training be made mandatory on whistleblowing for consideration by the whatever, I don't know which, you'll have to, right, thank you, you'll have to guide me which scrutiny committee, and we make that referral to that committee. Is that okay? Everyone content with that now? Matthew?
Yeah, I think that's fine. I want to make sure that I've made my point absolutely clearly. I wouldn't go as far as recommending everything should be mandatory. Ultimately, mandatory training is just a means to an end for awareness. That's what I've seen work. Something different might work in this environment, but I absolutely believe it's worth considering.
Thank you for that, Matt. And well, I think really we just let the scrutiny committee make that decision, whether it's whichever way they wish to deal with it in this authority. But our view as a committee is it should be, I think, mandatory. But let the scrutiny committee, make a decision. Councillor Hooper.
Hold on a sec. Good.
Okay. I just want to make the point. So this has been directed to us by standards who were dealing with a case which dealt with issues where whistleblowing was really, really important. So I think that when they said that it should be 100%, I think we should take due regard to that and therefore push it. So I think this is a classic case of why it was important, and we should never be reflecting back on saying why we didn't do this when we're dealing with the safety of some of the individuals who were impacted by it.
Thank you for that. Oh, Councillor Prothero, have you disappeared? Councillor Prothero.
Sorry, Chair. I was just coming back to the context that Tom was suggesting and recommending that we recommend this as a mandatory part of online induction training, e-learning, or however you want to deliver it, in that we will recommend as part of a review of all mandatory training that this is considered to be included. I think that's what he was suggesting.
Yep, I think everyone's nodding there, so we'll put it into the mix with everything else. Councillor Goodjohn.
Can I quickly make the point that as a corporate performance scrutiny committee member, that myself and Councillor Prothero should probably abstain from this vote if the committee is endorsing the proposal, as to not prejudice our decision when it actually comes to corporate performance, if you're endorsing that approach.
Yeah, well, we are. Hopefully. I think that's what's being proposed. Yeah. Obviously, it's a matter of you and Councillor Prothero, because otherwise, you'd be abstaining yourself from lots of committees and lots of decisions. Otherwise, I think you are actually okay, aren't you? Yeah, because, Okay, are we clear then? We've got the three recommendations contained within the report, and we've got a recommendation that we endorse the recommendation of the Standards Committee, that this should be part of the induction pack, etc., and suggest to the corporate, whatever, that it be made part of the mandatory training, subject to the review of all mandatory training of the council. How's that? We got there eventually. Okay. Can I have someone to move, please? Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Matthew. Anyone against? No. Thank you very much. We'll move on to the next item. Item 6 is the Q3 update, Audit Wales Work Programme Timetable 23-24, Vale Little Morgan Council. And I believe Tom's taken this.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. Ordinarily I wouldn't, and it would be a colleague from Audit Wales, but unfortunately they're not available this evening. So so I said that I'd give an overview, and obviously I can feed back any questions that members of the committee may have. So this is the status report in effect of Audit Wales's external audit work of the council, both from a finance and performance perspective as at the end of 2023. So the report highlights to members that the audit of the council's 22-23 accounts have been completed with an unqualified opinion being provided. The independent examination of the 2022-23 Welsh Church Acts Fund account is currently underway, and they've completed the review and certification of 2 out of 4 of the annual returns and subsidy claims that Audit Wales are required to audit for the 22-23 year. There's a piece of work being scoped around capital programme management, and it's planned that Audit Wales will undertake that work in the spring. In terms of the performance audit work, a piece of work around the use of performance information with a focus on service user feedback and outcomes is in its clearance process. Currently, we're awaiting a final copy of that report. It'll be scheduled for a future committee meeting with corporate performance and resources before those recommendations come to yourselves. And there's a report on unscheduled care going through the internal clearance process at Audit Wales with an expected issue date imminently to Health Board and the Directors of Social Care for both Cardiff and Vale councils. They've completed the review of digital as part of an All Wales piece of work, but they've Audit Wales have also done local studies, and that's going to be scheduled for a future committee. We've got the final version of that report. Audit Wales and CIW and Estin came to the Strategic Leadership Team meeting on the 23rd of January. It's an annual meeting of the 3 regulators with the Strategic Leadership Team. We went through the audit assurance and risk assessment process, identifying the areas that potentially Audit Wales may look to focus in on both nationally and locally in the coming year, and will be expecting a full programme that your committee will see in due course as well, Chair. The review of the planning report is scheduled to be presented to this committee on the 11th of March. And the final piece to note is that since Audit Wales prepared their report, the National Review of Care Planning for Children and Young People, subject to public law outline pre-proceedings, has been published. That was published on the 25th of January. So that's just an overview of where we were at the end of Q3.
Thank you, Tom. I've got to apologise. Tracy, I apologise. And if Debbie and Tony are still online, clearly you don't necessarily have to stay unless you wish to. But can I just thank you for your contributions? My apologies. I got carried away in the last agenda. Sorry, Tom, about that. So clearly we've got the update by Tom. Are there any questions? Councillor Good, John.
Can I just quickly make the point regarding the review of local government's use of performance indicators, that this be incorporated fully within the draft corporate plan? I know that it's going to go to corporate resources, but to make sure that everything that is contained within that is fully considered when the draft corporate plan is being discussed in future.
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Certainly, the recommendation is actually timely because we'll be producing a draft of the 2025-2030 corporate plan before the end of this calendar year so that we can consult on it. And the Audit Wales work around a focus on both the performance information and how that's provided to senior managers and members, and also importantly then the way in which outcomes are reported will be really important pieces of work, and we're planning to do some work then with scrutiny committees early in 2025 about the best way to present and report that information. So yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? Matthew?
Tom, this might be one you need to take away. I'm just interested on is it a delay or push out of the capital programme management work, and what, if any, ramifications does that have on it?
I will go back and query, Matthew. My understanding is it's a timing issue in terms of Audit Wales, but we don't have any immediate concerns in terms of the rescheduling of that one.
Any other questions? I've just got one. Obviously, Tom, if you could feed this back. It relates to page 16 of their report, which is the governance in fire and rescue authorities. There's a piece of work going on, which was timetabled from September 23 to August 24. Obviously, there's no field work planned in the Vale Little Morgan Council. I only raise this issue given the press articles last month in regards to South Wales Fire and Rescue Authority, of which you will have an elected representative on. And given the concerns raised by the independent inquiry there, is whether or not the council will be considering that report and the outcomes. Because obviously governance is a big issue. They're extremely concerned about the governance of the authority as such. And in doing so, if the authority is considering the report and the outcomes, whether it would sort of provide any feedback to the whole process, because I should imagine in January, Audit Wales had a sharp intake of breath. Their report, I don't know where they were with their report, but they'd been 3 months into it, and I bet all of a sudden they have this report, which is quite, scathing really in regards to what was going on there. And given that you are a contributing authority by way of levy to the authority, then I'm just wondering whether there should be any input from the authority. And again, if that comes back, I don't know what's going to happen there. And if Audit Wales had been here, I would have asked them the question. Is there any indication on the governance of the organisation? Because again, they were very, very critical of the fire rescue authority themselves in dealing with issues. Will there be any thoughts of reconstituting the fire rescue authority with independent members? Because currently it's all elected representatives, and it's politically based as well, because it's done on a proportional basis. And to give that sort of independence, whether they consider independent members going forward. It's a question I would have asked Audit Wales if they'd been here. But I think, the council ought to have some some input into it. I don't know what members' view is, but, you pay a huge levy, I should imagine, to the Fire and Rescue Authority.
And certainly, Chair, I'll pose the question on your behalf to colleagues in Audit Wales, but also just to provide some assurance for committee members that any of the local government and national studies that Audit Wales produce, we do receive copies of. We consider carefully the recommendations, and where it's appropriate for us to respond to them, we incorporate those into our regulatory tracking mechanisms to make sure that as a committee they're brought to your attention as well.
Yeah, thank you for that, Tom. Any other questions? Any comments? You see the recommendation then. Firstly, we review and note the contents of the report, which we've done, and subject to recommendation 1, the report referred to Cabinet for their oversight. Basically, I think if you could pick up the comments about fire and rescue, that would be useful. Someone prepared to move, please? Councillor Hooper, thank you. Can I have a second there? Councillor Goodjohn, anyone against? No? Thank you. Item 7, Treasury Management and Investment Strategy 24-25 and update for 23-24. The appendices have been circulated. Gemma, you've been waiting patiently. Your assistant's just joined you. So over to you.
Thank you very much. And I've got some slides to take us through the report. Slightly different timing this year in terms of the Treasury Management Strategy coming to Governance and Audit Committee. So, of course, the capital proposals this is based on are still out to public consultation, and therefore the Treasury Management Strategy does reflect those, but it is possible we may need to make some amendments for Cabinet and the final report that goes to Council. So this report covers lots of different things. So our investments are borrowing in year positions. That's our Q3 monitoring. Our borrowing strategy, our investment strategy. It sets out the Treasury Management Strategy over a rolling 3-year period. And we report on a number of statutory performance indicators. Oh, yes, please. Thank you. Sorry. We set the MRP policy and And as I mentioned, this is based on the updated draft capital programme 24-25 to 28-29, but also the 30-year housing business plan, which was approved by Council in January 2024. It's a bit of a work in progress this year, so I will need to bring a revised treasury management strategy in year. We aren't quite there in terms of our IFRS 16 impact, which of course is implemented from the 1st of April 2024. And we also have savings proposals that are contingent on an amendment to our MRP policy, which again, I will need to bring later in the year. And that will obviously be subject to liaison with external audit and our treasury management advisors. So in terms of the treasury management strategy, what we're trying to set out is what are our capital expenditure plans going forward? How are they funded? What's the impact on our capital financing requirement and the impact on the borrowing need? How are we going to manage that as a council? How does the council know that this is affordable and how will we pay the borrowing back? We're also considering what we will invest and where and how we know it's going to be secure and liquid. This just sets out a couple of the key considerations in terms of treasury management. So we're managing our cash flow, but we're also considering how we're going to finance our capital requirements as part of the capital programme. So in terms of the 23-24 position, this slide sets out the borrowing position. And we did manage to borrow £5 million. It was only over 5 years though, but we utilised the discounted rate for HRA as part of the borrowing. So we were able to borrow at 4.38%. We do have additional borrowing need in year, but we're going to need to keep a really close eye on the rates as we progress through the year because they have gone back up. We did miss an opportunity between Christmas and New Year, unfortunately. So we've got a daily call where we're just keeping an eye on the PWLB borrowing rates. We do have PWLB maturing loans in year. And I suppose the good news is that they matured at 5.64% and we were able to borrow slightly below, but we will need to borrow some additional sums before year end. We'd like to utilise that preferential HRA borrowing rate if we can, but of course, because we're expecting rates to come down in the future, we need to be really careful about the balance of that. And this just sets out then, this is within the Treasury Management Strategy, some of those target borrowing rates that are being provided by our Treasury Management advisors. In terms of investments, you'll see that closing balance of investments at the end of December, and that's considerably less than we've had in previous years. I think our investments are typically at a lower point at this time of year, so it might be that we have some additional income between now and the end of the financial year, but it does reflect that reserves are being spent, which I think is the messages we're saying, but it is supported then by the balances that we're seeing. So we're investing over a number of different methods, so local authority investments. We also have investments with DMO, and that's a really flexible source of investment, so we can invest up until quite late in the day, and the returns have been pretty good. And we also utilise money market funds as well. And the great thing about the money market funds is it enables us to pull down that funding as it's needed. And also the rates have been pretty good. And obviously those rates reflect from the start of the year to the end of December, so that they're kind of blended rate. In terms of the Treasury Management Strategy itself, so as I said, this is setting out the capital expenditure, and this is the updated draft capital programme. And as you can see, as we've seen in previous years, considerable sums in the housing revenue account space. And that's having a significant impact on the Treasury Management Strategy that we're bringing forward. There's also significant amount of expenditure in learning and skills, but that's dropping right down. And that's where I suppose some of the remaining sustainable communities for learning programmes are kind of intended to draw to an end, but we do have a number of schemes within that pipeline schemes line, and once those business cases are approved, they'll move up. This next slide then sets out how that capital programme is funded, and you'll see the bottom towards the bottom, we have the prudential borrowing requirement and the supported borrowing requirement. And as you'll know from the draft capital proposals, we've flatlined the capital funding across the period, and that's reflected in the supported borrowing requirement. And the prudential borrowing requirement largely reflects the HRA proposals, but there are additional sums for sustainable communities for learning reflected there as well. And City Deal. So as I said, then we consider what the impact of those borrowing and funding proposals are on the capital financing requirement. And I think this is quite handy because it does demonstrate then how significantly the HRA CFR is going to increase. So, so the capital expenditure is driving the capital financing requirement, but net of any repayments through the MRP. The HRA capital financing requirement more than doubles in this period. So it increases by 78 million, and the general fund increases approximately 24 million. This slide sets out the liability benchmark, and this is projecting forward 30 years. I think when I sent our treasury management strategy to our investment advisor, he was straight on the phone saying to me, "You've got to explain this 800 million borrowing need in 30 years' time." So I think we need to think about how we present this in future, and we probably need to split out general fund and HRA so they're separate. What I've done is to try and show how the split of borrowing changes over that period. So HRA accounts for 42% of our capital financing requirement based on our projections for 23-24, but by 2052-53, it's projected to account for 89%. And that's partly because HRA have a 30-year business plan and we don't. So that's partly why the differential has arisen. But we are assuming supported borrowing will continue across that period. So this reflects our balance sheet projections, and Adam went into quite a lot of detail in the training session about how we're funding some of that internal borrowing. We've set a kind of notional target of 30 million in terms of cash headroom. So we'd like to try and maintain that. And when we're planning our borrowing need, we try and keep that as a target amount of buffer that we're working towards. We will see that internal borrowing start to reduce based on our projections. We do need to really manage our external investments over the period. We need to keep £10 million in order to be able to comply with MiFID II and be able to invest on a professional, I'm sure that's the wrong term, professional basis. But we think it's important that 30 million, otherwise we're going to be really prone to fluctuations in interest rates and availability of cash. This slide just sets out our external debt projections across the period. As you can see then, we're allowing for MRP, new advances, but also replacement borrowing. So we have a lot of borrowing maturing across the period, and we need to have a process of replacing it as well. We will try and utilise preferential rates where they're available. And we'll try to manage our cash flows and our internal borrowing so that we are keeping in mind the target rates that our Treasury Management advisors set, but also their projections about what they think interest rates are likely to do. But what we want to avoid, obviously, is having to borrow an emergency situation and not being able to pick and choose our rates. We do set a number of performance indicators around our thresholds for what we're allowed to borrow up to. So our operational boundary isn't something we would normally borrow up to, but we would occasionally for cash flow purposes. The authorised limit we would never expect to borrow up to. So that's the absolute limit of borrowing. And that's just a summary then of our borrowing need across the period. So as I said, the other thing we have to consider as part of the Treasury Management Strategy is whether we can afford to do the borrowing, and there are some prudential indicators that set that ratio. So in terms of non-HRA borrowing, we think about our RSG projections and our council tax income. And then in terms of HRA, we think about our rental income across the period. And obviously, as part of the HRA business plan, there are lots of affordability considerations and sensitivity analysis as well. So as I said at the start of the slides, we will need to come back with a revised MRP policy in year. This is our existing MRP policy. So it's assuming that for supported borrowing, we would borrow over 40 years. For unsupported borrowing, it will be matched to the use of the life, but a maximum of 50 years. For HRA, before 21-22, we'd be charging 2%. And from 21-22 onwards, we're implementing the asset life method over 50 years, so very similar. And then where loans have been advanced for affordable housing, Band B schools, and things like the Lag B that we receive for resurfacing, we're calculating MRP on an annuity basis. And then this slide just sets out what that MRP is estimated at for 24-25. So that's all the slides I have on the Treasury Management Strategy, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Hi, can I just help explain for those if you're not entirely clear with regarding some of those slides, particularly what was mentioned around the £750 million in the HRA account, just to explain the reasoning behind that. It's all part of the housing business plan, and that is to build thousands of homes over the next 30 years, the rents of which would account and pay for that debt along with the upkeep of those homes without profit. And that housing revenue account is entirely separate from the rest of the council's budget. So there is no linking between the two, and any debts in the HRA do not get charged directly to the council's revenue budget. So just to assist with that, and additionally, I want to make the point regarding the 30 million, which is a huge amount of money for anyone, anywhere, but to make absolutely clear that we have cash flow issues just as anyone else. Many people pay council tax over the course of 10 months rather than 12. So there are some months where we get less than others. And when you have a budget effectively, when you include grants of £500 million, as this council does, you do need to have some level of reserves to keep cash flow going. So that's why that 30 million is so important to make sure we hold on to, and as we are using reserves, to be absolutely aware of where our limit is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. I'm sure you're an excellent advocate for the Finance Department and the Housing Department, but really good explanation that. Thank you very much for, certainly for the long-term investment into council housing, really. Councillor Hooper?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the excellent presentation. I've just got 3 points and 3 questions to make. Just so clarity, so this is going to be coming back through the year then. We're looking at this being formalised, so that's just clarity over that.
Yeah.
You talked about, Jeremy, rates are pretty good at the moment, but that's got to be in context, isn't it? Because I think rates are pretty good, but inflation's really high. So your money, although we may be getting a better rate than we would have done a few years ago, considerably, we're in a completely different environment in terms of what that money can get us. I think that point needs to be made in this forum. And the last thing, and this is almost linked to that, because when we talk about debt, I don't know whether people have seen, Wales Online have been publishing the debts of councils recently. And when we're talking about debt, we need to be talking about investment and what we're doing with the money and why it's important. It's a presentational exercise, but I think we're in danger of people just hearing this council's in a huge amount of debt, instead of, and picking up from Councillor Goodjohn's point of actually what we're doing with the money is really important. So and this is a public forum, so people could and should, I wish more people would, watch what's going on in these environments. So we just need to make sure when we've got this opportunity, there may be a few people in the public, hopefully there's people who are writing stories for Wales Online and they can clarify their story of not being this awful situation. So that's just a point of clarification. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hooper, and I really appreciate the opportunity to clarify that, because I've also seen those stories in the press. So I'll be bringing a revised strategy as part of the mid-year report is my current proposal. I think that makes sense. We bring most of the strategy at that point anyway. In terms of investments, no, absolutely, the cost of inflation is really high. The cost of borrowing is really high. We're able to generate a temporary saving off the back of investment income at the moment as part of the budget, and we hope to extend that into next financial year as part of the budget strategy. It will only be a temporary position. We expect investment returns to reduce. We also expect there not to be significant sums to invest in the same way we're able to in future. So yeah, absolutely. And those investments, it should be really clear, are temporary use of cash flow. They're not permanent allocation of cash flow. So we only invest. I think Adam set out our investment horizon and it's relatively short. We receive Welsh Government funding in blocks. We receive Welsh Government grant in blocks. But of course, how we spend it isn't linear. It's matched to the delivery of programmes, and it's matched to how our payrolls fall, for instance, and how our precepts payments to town and community councils and police fall. In terms of the borrowing, absolutely. So this is how we're funding our capital programme, and in some ways, some of that borrowing is instructed as part of the funding mechanism. So examples that I've mentioned are the LAGB, where we were given the revenue streams to match funding over a period of time to invest in our housing, and we've also had that for schools investment as well in the past. Our supported borrowing, of course, is we're given the revenue stream to fund supported borrowing. So it's a mechanism for how the council receives its funding in the capital space particularly. We also inherited a lot of borrowing as part of reorganisation as a council. I think the council has borrowed very little externally. In recent years, there was some borrowing that was done as part of the housing revenue buyout, some borrowing that's been done for sustainable communities for learning, and we've recently undertaken some borrowing for HRA. Very limited additional external borrowing. We did borrow some sums last year at a favourable rate, but it's not. We've sought to manage it through internal borrowing for a long period of time. Matt, I'm not sure whether you want to add anything on that response.
I was just going to add on the media inquiries we had on debt. We were really mindful of where that was going, and we did give them a full contextual answer and actually did talk about the investment that we're making in social housing across the Vale.
Just a quick one, Gemma, and then I think it was on the balance sheet projections slide, and I just noticed it going along. The projected total investment, I think, was relatively static around 31, 32, and then it suddenly jumped up, and I just wondered if there's a particular rationale for that.
It certainly looks odd, and I will take it away and look at it. I did notice that on the slide as well, but I will absolutely take that away and have a look at it, and we'll make sure that if it does need amending, that it's circulated among members and, of course, corrected for the final proposals that go forward. Okay.
I've just got two questions. The first one is, the first one is the use of capital receipts. Obviously, within the tables, there's a projection, and certainly in 214 to use 11.833 of capital receipts. I'm just wondering what happens if those capital receipts don't come into the council during the 5-year term or 5-year term, and how you're going to deal with that. And the second one was in regards to where you have loans maturing now. Are you likely to do those over a longer term period, or given the market circumstances at the moment, would you do them on a short term basis in the hope that interest rates come down and you can get a preferential rate maybe in 6 months' time?
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of capital receipts, I think we've been relatively fortunate in that through the school investment programme, but also in other areas we've been able to build up a bit of a balance of capital receipts. So I think where we've been able to release sites through Band A even, or early on in Band B of the Sustainable Communities for Learning. We've ring-fenced those capital receipts for education, so we'll be spending those. We do have some need to continue to generate capital receipts, and that's built in further along in the programme. If that didn't come in, then maybe a need to temporarily borrow to bridge that funding gap. We also do have some ring-fence capital receipts for social services, and we apply that approach for vehicles as well, to ensure that we're able to continue to invest in those approaches. In terms of the rates, it's going to be a really interesting balancing act, I think, because obviously we do have this favourable rate for HRA that we would like to utilise. We would expecting to borrow short. And as I said, the recent borrowing we did for HRA was around 5 years. We would look to borrow shorter if that looked to be favourable. Obviously, typically, we tend to borrow far longer. We tend to borrow over 50 years. But because of the projections about where the rates, we expect the rates to go, we'll be looking to balance that. Of course, we've also need to be careful that the capital expenditure that we're profiling in does materialise in accordance with the profile, because capital expenditure obviously can slip for all sorts of reasons, and we've seen a lot of those reasons in the capital programme in recent years, although HRA did do a really good job at outturning near to the profile last year. So we need to balance all of those considerations in terms of making a decision.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Any comments? No. You see the recommendations. I'm told that recommendation 2 should be that we endorse the policy. Is that correct? Because it's a matter for council, and 3 as well. So we endorse it. So subject to that amendment. You see the recommendations there, 1, 2 and 3. Someone prepared to move, please? Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Hooper, thank you. Anyone against? No. Thank you very much. Thank you, Gemma. Thank you, Matt. Item 8 then is Stanwell School Capital Project.
Thank you, Chair. Andrew Wathen, Head of the Regional Internal Audit Service. So this is a report bringing back to committee the position statement on the internal audit review of Stanwell School Capital Project. As members will be aware, the information regarding Stanwell and previous internal audit report was presented to Governance and Audit Committee in last year as part of my annual report of 22-23 on work that the internal audit team undertook as a result of concerns being raised about the financial position of the school. On bringing the information into Governance and Audit Committee, members quite rightly asked us to do some further work, in particular and more specifically in relation to the capital project that the school was undergoing at the time. We subsequently did do further work and have just done quite a thorough review of the capital project, and indeed we've incorporated the knowledge and expertise of our property team within the council to give us expert opinions where appropriate. Unfortunately, some key staff were not available when we undertook the audit, so we had to get information from those that were available at the school in relation to that particular contract. As a result of the outcome of our audit, it is quite sensitive and confidential. The matter has subsequently been referred back to the Chair of Governors and the acting head teacher to deal with under appropriate council policies and procedures, and also referred on to relevant external organisations for further consideration, Chair. And I've taken legal advice from our monitoring officer, and all I can say is matters are ongoing.
Any questions? Nope. Any comments? Oh, sorry. Do we have a question? Nigel? I apologise, Nigel. You're not on my screen, so I have to get my colleagues on my left to assist me. And you're on mute. Okay, if there's no questions, any comments? No, if there are no comments, I would like to add an additional recommendation here, if I may. The additional recommendation is number 2, a full and comprehensive report be prepared for Governance and Audit Committee with lessons learned once the outcomes of the referral to the outside organisations and chair and acting head is known. Clearly, we were made aware of this back in June 23. Andrew and his team have obviously carried out that follow-up. It's been referred to the school and it's been referred to other organisations. And I think it's only right and proper that once the outcome is known, that it's referred back to us for consideration. The lessons learned part is maybe lessons learned for directorates, you know, where there's an issue for the education directorate or someone like that. So if members would be happy to support that, I'd be extremely grateful. Councillor Goodjohn. You'd be happy to support it. Thank you very much. Okay, so Andrew, is that happy, content with that?
Yes, Chair, we'll take that on board, definitely.
Lovely. Okay, have we got a note of that? What was that? Councillor Prothero?
I was just agreeing that I think that's a really good idea, Chair. And I think in the context of how this has happened, and certainly the audit that's looked at the practices there, the financial situation, the procurement, that is definitely a lessons learned. And I'm sure that that will be something that other schools would be interested, I think, to learn from. So I think definitely a full report afterwards would be certainly something I'd like to see. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Prothero, for that support as well. So we've got the 2 recommendations. Someone move, please. Councillor Goodjohn, seconder. Councillor Hooper, anyone against? No, that's carried. Thank you very much. Item 9 then is recommendation monitoring. Jo?
Thank you. Hi. Yes, thank you. The purpose of this report is to provide members of the committee with a position statement on the internal audit recommendations made, implemented and outstanding as at the 31st of December 2023, and Appendix A provides the detail of that. A total of 87 high and medium priority recommendations have been made following the conclusion of the audits from this year's 23-24 audit plan. All those recommendations have been agreed, and to date 29 have been implemented and 58 have a future implementation date. Appendix A also provides information on audits undertaken pre-23-24 where recommendations are outstanding or the target date of implementation is yet to arrive. More details is provided on these in Appendix B and C. Appendix B provides the detail of the one high priority outstanding recommendation which was made in a 22-23 audit in respect of building compliance monitoring. Work is still ongoing to address the identified risks. Appendix C provides details of 2 medium priority recommendations that were made in 21-22 audits but still have future implementation dates. One of these is in respect of corporate safeguarding and the other in respect of potholes. The Director of Social Services and the Director of Corporate Resources have been requested to attend today following a request made by this committee in October 2023 to provide assurances that appropriate action was taken to address recommendations agreed from the 21-22 audit reports relating both to corporate safeguarding and cybersecurity, which at that time had not been fully implemented. The 2 recommendations relating to cybersecurity have now been implemented and are no longer reported within the appendices to this report. The 1 recommendation in respect of corporate safeguarding is included in Appendix C with a revised future implementation date. And as always, any undue delays or issues identified whilst monitoring the implementation of these recommendations are always highlighted to senior management and then ultimately this committee. Thank you.
I assume from what you're saying is the Director of Social Services is online to address the corporate safeguarding recommendation, which is the final report was 2021, and it's been put off. Well, it was agreed that it be done on the 30th of April 22, and that was revised to the April 23, and it's now been extended again to the 31st of July 24. Clearly, we just need to speak to Lance as to, why this has taken so much time. Director.
Okay. As I said in the last meeting, this action is complete as I advised in terms of the process. So the process is in place. What's happened since we met last is we trialled it with one of the teams that I think they're based in environment and housing and tested that process. And so that has now worked. The reason we've extended the date is I think we recognise that we can't just stop there at a fairly manual system. We need to have something more automated in place. So that would include the design of digital forms so they can be reported more easily and through the council's IDEV system, which monitors individual training. So that would be covered through the managers' areas. The reason this action has taken so long is because a tiny fraction of it sits within social services, the majority of it sits outside social services. And so I think my operational manager has been, obviously trying to liaise with those departments to make sure that all those other actions are completed as well.
Thank you for that. And I note that obviously an audit is, I presume that's a follow-up audit, is in process, looking at this, and clearly, if that can be done ready for, the revised date of July 24, then at least we'll get some assurance that everything is in hand, I would hope. Joan?
Yes, thank you. An audit is underway, a corporate safeguarding audit is underway. It's not necessarily a follow-up just to that aspect. We've got corporate safeguarding as an annual item on our plan, but we have asked that some testing be undertaken during that audit to substantiate that the access to staff who haven't got online training are getting the training, and that recording process is working, as Lance has explained.
Okay, if it could address obviously that recommendation, that sort of saves double counting, really. Councillor Hooper?
Thank you, Chair. And just an observation, listening to Lance's explanation there, he talked about the fact that his operational manager needs to work with other people in the organisation. Perhaps there's a lesson for us to, when we've got things like this that are important, and maybe the person who's deemed responsible needs to work with others, we should be better at making sure that these things are highlighted, perhaps at the senior leadership team, to pick these up and make sure that, because this sounds like it's landed on somebody's lap and it's become a really difficult job for them, and maybe we can make life a bit easier. Thank you, Chair.
Andrew?
Thanks, Chair. Just to add what Joan has said, really, as with all our recommendations, we will follow up to make sure they are implemented, and the proof of the pudding is that follow-up. As Joan said, we will do a follow-up of safeguarding audit to incorporate this particular recommendation as well. So we will come back to committee and give you assurance or otherwise that recommendation has in fact been implemented when we've undertaken the work and we've got the evidence to support our comments.
Okay. Thank you for that, Andrew. Thank you, Lance, for coming along. Obviously, we've picked up the point that, there's a corporate issue here, and it's not just social services, but it may affect other directorates. And clearly, I'm sure Tom will just raise that at the management team as well. The next one was pothole repairs. I note that in the current position, a report was presented to Cabinet on the 25th of January 2024. Do we know what the outcome of that was? Do we have the director online or the manager?
No, we don't, Chair.
Any reason why he's not here? Because he was asked, or is it, sorry, he or she was requested to attend.
Chair, I think last time round it was the Director of Resources and the Director of Social Services were actually invited to attend. So if he hasn't been attended...
Well, yeah. Clearly, you know, we need to know what the update is from Cabinet, and it would have been beneficial if the Director had been here to address that and actually put us in a position. Well, you're the Director, you know. Go on.
Can I assist the committee in saying that it hasn't gone to the 25th of January meeting, but it will be going on Thursday on the 8th. It's on the agenda for Cabinet. So if that helps at all with understanding the current situation, we'll find out then what the decision of Cabinet is.
Yeah, that does help. I find that quite interesting, but I do consider it quite rude not to attend a committee when requested to, you know, even to tell us that little piece of information. Can I request that next Governance Audit Committee that the Director attends in person, and I can explore, and the committee can explore why A didn't attend. I assume it's a he, and B, you know, what the outcome is. I'm going to be told I can't do it now, am I, Tom?
I certainly wouldn't be so presumptuous, Chair. It was just to clarify that the Director of Environment and Housing hasn't been invited to this evening's meeting. That's an error on our part in terms of the report. So it's not the fact that he hasn't or he's chosen not to be here this evening. We can certainly make sure that he's invited next time.
So do I call to account now for not inviting him?
Chair, you can call me to account if you like.
Make sure you invite him next time.
Okay, Chair, with regards to this report, from the previous Governance and Audit Committee, we were asked to invite the the Director of Social Services and the Director of Resources. That was it.
Okay.
So there's some misunderstanding here, Chair, which we'll certainly rectify for next time.
Okay.
Moving forward.
Well, I don't want him in person then at next committee. You know, we'll be prepared to listen to what the Cabinet has to say as to whether or not it adopts whatever it says in the report. But clearly, you know, these issues, you know, this one will have been outstanding for nearly 2 years. You know, it's just not good enough. So I know people are busy, and I know we've had COVID, and I know we've had Brexit, but, you know, it's no excuse for some of these issues, clearly. So we'll just wait for an update from him if he could be invited to the next committee, then it may all be addressed. So, but he can still be advised that, you know, please deal with these as a matter of urgency. The other one in regards to Ysgol Derry since, is it St Cyrus building compliance? Where are we on that then?
The latest update I've had on that, it's not necessarily specifically to that school, although during that audit, that was where the issue was identified. It's to develop a process of tracking. So if concerns or remedial action is required in any of the inspections, that is monitored to make sure that the right people are informed and the right actions are taken. There was a bit of a gap in the process when we looked at it. So the operational manager in building services is working alongside colleagues in schools as well to make sure that process is in place. They are moving on it, but they're waiting for approval of a monitoring report. And I'm not quite certain where they're waiting for that to be approved. So I've been told that it is in hand and we are trying to get some more update for you as soon as possible.
Well, can I suggest, again, the operational manager building services be invited to the next committee, given that this matter has been outstanding. Again, there was an they must have thought it was fairly straightforward to do, because the final report date is the 20th of April 23 and the agreed date to implement was the 31st of May 23. That's not happened. It slipped again to the 30th of September 2023 and we're now on the 5th of February and it's still not been delivered. Yeah. Yeah, maybe, again, we may have, they may have addressed it by the time they come, but, you know, these things, you know, if they set a date to do something, they should comply with it. And again, it's a high category. Okay, what's the recommendation? Let's just go quickly back. Sorry. Recommendation is that we consider the information provided of the status of high and medium recommendations made. So we've noted that. And clearly there's a recommendation that the, or is it OM Building Services be called to the next committee in regards to St. Cyrus and the other school. And obviously the director in regards to potholes. Yep. Okay. Someone prepare to move, please. Thank you. Seconder. Thank you. Councillor John moved. Councillor Hooper seconded. Anyone against? No. Thank you very much. Item 10 then is the Regional Internal Audit Shared Services Partnership 2024.
Thanks, Chair. Sandra Wathen, Head of Regional Internal Audit Service. This is just to inform members of the progress of how we've arrived at where we are and where we intend going in terms of a regional internal audit service. So, as some members may be aware, the Regional Internal Audit Shared Service was formed in April 2019, hosted by the Vale of Glamorgan, and was for an initial 3-year period with an option to extend for 2 years. It was signed for those 3 years, and all 4 partners at the time then extended for a further 2 years. The partners involved are the Vale of Glamorgan, Bridgend, Merthyr Tydfil and RCT. So we're coming up to the 5-year anniversary, which will be in April 2024. So there's a need to refresh the partnership in terms of how we're going to move forward. And for the original partners to sign a new agreement moving forward for an additional 3 years with an option to extend for 2. We've received positive feedback from all 4 partner Section 151 officers and from their senior management teams in relation to the audit service that's been delivered over the past 4 and a bit years, which is encouraging and reassuring. The Vale of Glamorgan Council is committed to continuing as host of the Regional Internal Audit Shared Service and taking it forward to achieve its original objectives. Point to note, Chair, that RCT have given notice that they do not wish to continue with the shared partnership moving forward from April 2024. They've decided to take their internal auditing back in-house. But we have got some other interested parties from other unitary authorities within South Wales who have expressed an interest in joining the service from 24-25. So it's just a matter for committee to agree to take this to Cabinet to support the continuation of the Regional Internal Audit Service, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Councillor Hooper.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm just wondering, will you lose any specialist resource if they're taken back to RCT, and is there any backfilling that's needed to, if there is any resource that's gone? Thanks.
The short answer is no. We've got an IT auditor here at the Vale who is developing that work across the 4 organisations. That person will remain within the service. There's a fraud officer within the Vale who comes under my team, under my remit of my team, but specifically works for the Vale in his investigations. So, no.
Any other questions? Matthew?
Andrew, I don't wish to sound awkward in this case, and personally, in terms of the service, absolutely, very happy. But I'm looking at the recommendation, and we're recommending to continue to host for 3 years. And I just look at the report and say, I don't know what requirement there is. So we're doing it for 3 years. I don't know what the cost is, what the implications are. If we've got any other parties going to be on board, what that means, and does it mean any changes? And I guess I'm struggling with the details of recommending as a governance and audit committee something where it doesn't feel like the full details are here. And if I'm misunderstanding the recommendation and it's just saying we're happy with the performance of the shared service, then please tell me to be quiet. But it's the other aspect, I think, maybe the commercial side and maybe the more statutory sides I'm struggling with.
Okay, thanks, Matthew. It's deliberately vague of detail because it is primarily about performance, because there's no loss or as a result of one partner coming out. They are in essence taking back the resources that they put into it 5 years ago. It just so happens that that's worked out in that way. If there was another partner, we might need to go into it in a bit more detail and provide you with a bit more information. But they withdraw their contribution in terms of monetary value. They lose the number of days that we are delivering in terms of an audit plan. So, for example, they're paying for 1,200 days worth of audit and contributing to 1,200 days of audit. If they go back internally, they're taking that contribution with them. Therefore, they fund their own 1,200 days and very little impact on the rest of the audit provision to the other three partners. There will be some impact because there will be more of my time and Joan's time involved with the third partner, because we will lose one of the audit managers who covers RCT and Merthyr. So we will have to put some more management time into that to support it. But we're quite comfortable we could work on a three-partner operating model as opposed to a 2 and a 2 at the moment. But if members want further details, we can bring it forward, but we'd have to be in the Part 2 report here.
I guess from a personal view, it's not something that I want to force the issue on. I guess it's just, and I'm happy to take your kind of your reassurance on it. It just, I guess I don't feel like I've got all the information to make a black and white decision. But ultimately, I'm also not so strongly opinion if the rest of the committee are happy with it. I'm certainly happy to leave with it.
Are there any other questions? Cadw Hooper.
I'm going to do it again. I think Matthew's got a point. I think we should look at this in more detail. I think we should take it under Part 2. Otherwise, at the moment, what I'm not hearing is the benefit of us working with other authorities. Clearly, that's a cost saving, I think, is what we're looking at. But if we're recommending it or being asked to recommend it, then I think we should do that. And losing one of the partners surely must have some impact on the cost. And I think Andrew's reference said it will have a slight increase. Looks like some more of your time is going to be put into these things. I think that'll be worth knowing. So can I support that request that we get some more information? If it was a request, Matthew, I'm not sure if it was. I think it was. Support that request.
Are there any other questions? Can I make a suggestion here then? Can I suggest that we defer this until the 11th of March committee to get a fuller report? Obviously, I'm mindful of the 1st of April because, that's when the new agreement would start. Clearly, there may just need to be an agreement with the other authorities just to extend it for another 6 months. I'm sure that can be done somewhere along the line, because RCT going out on the 1st of April, there's all the tube issues and all the other things which deal with that. But given that members have raised the concern, lack of information, in order to make the decision, then clearly they do need all the information before them to come to a reasoned decision. The other point I'd make is I think on the next occasion, Matt, I think you need to take this report, because I find it a bit strange that the head of the regional service taking a report to recommend that it's re-energised. There's a new agreement. I think as the head of the finance department of this authority, I think my preference would be if you take it next time, because again, you can give the reassurance. I'm not, Andrew, this is no criticism of you whatsoever. But for openness and transparency, I think you could give that view from the authority of providing the service to the committee and why it's needed and what benefits it gives, so that we get an open and transparent decision, if you see what I mean. I don't know whether people follow that, but I think that would be more beneficial from you, because obviously what I don't want to say, well, there's a conflict of interest here. Whereas with yourself, you're commissioning the service, really, aren't you, or forming a joint service. But would committee be happy just to defer this for a fuller report, Matt?
I take on board your comments, and I think it is a difficult one, in that and Andrew isn't the chief internal auditor solely of the Vale. He is the head of the service, and it is part of his role of a head of service to actually deliver the extended shared service. So there is a bit of grey area about which of us presents a report. I'm more than happy to present these reports in the future, and do understand that your comments. It's fair to say that we're disappointed that RCT chose to leave the partnership, and it's difficult to understand when the comments coming back from them have been positive about the performance of the partnership and how well it's worked. I don't think they've fully appreciated the collaboration on systems, the standardisation of approach, and the direction of travel that we've generally had with this being increasingly cross-authority working. And those things don't happen overnight, and they don't happen in the first year or even couple of years of a partnership. So I am disappointed that that they haven't come forward to renew. I would perhaps ask you to trust us in taking discussions forward with other potential partners and the existing ones, because what I don't want to do is have any uncertainty around this partnership going forward. So I would counsel against asking us to only enter into a 6-month arrangement. We need to go forward with some confidence in this. The underlying business case that came to the council a number of years ago hasn't changed, and there's good reason why you would want to continue this arrangement, and perhaps it was a shortcoming of ourselves that we didn't put a more detailed Part 2 report in front of you today, but I don't really want to delay. We had been talking with our colleagues, including RCT, about what the roadmap and direction of the partnership needed to be going forward. And it is about creating greater resilience across the region, being able to give us greater assurance that we can deliver individual authorities audit plans, especially when there's vacancies and turnover, which there naturally will be in a service. It's about giving us extra resilience, and actually that resilience and the greater economies of scale from having perhaps 2 or 3 additional members do give us then the opportunity to explore some commercial opportunities and deliver further efficiencies for our host councils. So I would ask you to trust us a bit, and for us to go forward in those discussions, and us, but still to give you a commitment to bring you a more detailed report.
I endorse that. Andrew, it's only this report, the agreement, I think, that Matt needs to take, in my opinion. I think the issue around, and again, there'll be members of this committee who weren't on this authority possibly or considered this matter when the original proposal came out 5 years ago. So they need a bit more background. You'd have my full support, subject to the report, about collaborative working. I think it's the way to go forward in lots of these areas, because as budgets shrink, you know, those who want to pull it back in, as long as they've got the, you know, clearly RCT appear to have more money than anyone else to do all these things on their own. But building on it, and Andrew knows I'm fully supportive building on the service going ahead, if we can bring more partners on, the point you quite rightly make, building resilience, giving greater offer to staff and opportunities to staff to progress through the system, whereby when you're in one authority, there's very little progression. So I think, you know, I endorse all that, but I think it's just that background information that the members require just to ensure that going forward, this is the right vehicle. And again, as you say, Matt, as sort of head, because you're sort of head of the shared, because it's a shared service hosted by the Vale, you know, it'll be your presumably recommendation to say that we just continue on this basis for the very reasons you've just set out. The only reason I said about extending it, if the 11th of March is too late to make that decision, you know, do we need just a bit of flexibility? But if the 11th of March is okay, and all being well with a fair wind, there's a approval to go forward, because presumably does this have to go to council? Cabinet. So it will go to cabinet hopefully within March, and the decision is made. We're off again. Can I also ask whether or not there's why is the reason of 3 years? Why aren't we saying 5 years?
That was just the original.
Right. So why do we say 5 years? You know, if there's a commitment by authorities to work together in this way, you've got 3 authorities who exist, continue to work in together to deliver this service. They've already done it for 5 years. You could do a 3 years with a 2 years or whatever, or a 3-year period with an opt out for 2. You know, do you know what I mean? But the greater security you have, the more benefits it'll bring, in my view. But, you know, if we're happy to just defer this until the next committee in August with a full report, then hopefully, you know, members will have the information to make that decision.
March.
March.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The you do make a good point, and sort of my experience of shared service previously, these aren't contractual arrangements and subject to normal procurement rules. I think we probably need to think outside of the 3+2 even. And I'm minded to have a conversation with our existing partners around having an open, continuous arrangement with options to opt out rather than continually coming back and opting back in. So we'll have a chat with them about actually, as a minimum, making it 5 years, but actually having an open-ended long-term relationship.
See, a good points come out of this. That's ready. So, so if we defer this until the 11th of March for a fuller report, you know, it may be worth attaching the original report as a background paper so members can read that, and then you can just, you know, add on or whatever to that report. So don't take it as a criticism of you, Andrew. Please do not. It's just that transparency element, I think, that's required.
Yeah, there'll be a part 1 and part 2.
Okay, item 11, which is the updated forward work programme.
Thank you, Chair. The updated forward work programme is agenda item 11. It's the usual report that committee are very familiar with. Appendix A has been updated to reflect decisions made in previous meetings. Please note that the next meeting is scheduled for the 11th of March and the proposed agenda items are in the table within the report. And obviously it can be amended based on today's discussions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. Obviously, we'll have the deferred report or the updated report on the joint service come in there. The operational manager, building services for St Cyrus. What was it, Gareth?
St Cyrus on Ysgol
Yeah. And was there another director? Pot Old Man. Yes. So gentleman. So if that could be coming along. So the recommendation. Oh, any questions? No, any comments? Oh, question, Councillor Hooper.
I don't know if it's a comment or a question. We've spoken before about the need to have the accounts represented by the city deal. 16th of November, I just checked back through and I'm still waiting.
Matt?
The audit isn't complete yet. And this isn't because of anything at the Cardiff Capital Region. This is about resources with Audit Wales, and them obviously focusing their attention on the counties first in terms of their work programmes. I am in discussion with colleagues at the region, and when we have those accounts, I'll have a detailed discussion with them about somebody coming along and giving this committee an overview and explanation of the accounts and the operation. So it's in hand, but there's no point anything coming here until we've actually had their audited opinion.
Still on the agenda. Okay. Any other comments? No. Recommendations then are, obviously we note the forward work programme. We endorse the schedule of items for the next meeting on the 11th of March 2024, together with the additional items. And obviously we've confirmed the list of people who we'd like to invite for each item. Someone to move, please. Thank you very much. Councillor Goodjohn, seconder, Councillor Hooper. Thank you very much. Anyone against? No, thank you. Item 12, any items deemed urgent by the chairman? I have got none under part 1. Then we go part 2. Any items which chair has decided urgent? I have none. That concludes the meeting. Can I thank everyone for their attendance, for their stamina, for staying the whole length of this meeting, for the excellent debate, and also thank the officers for their input into this committee. So thank you very much, and those of you here, have a safe journey home, and those who are home, thank you very much.